Perfect, fantastic. And thank you everyone for joining the webinar today. So Sarah's explained about me. So the webinar today is about the aggregation of calendar-based items using the Calendar Plus app from QuizCom. Now, just a little bit of background to this first of all. So the Calendar Plus app is part of the wider DataView Plus suite. You can either purchase it as part of that DataView Plus, or you can also purchase it on its own. And it's a set of SPFX web parts, which are all about aggregating and then presenting data in different ways in SharePoint. So, and also Microsoft Teams. So for instance, it could be list data, it could be images, it could be organizational information in an organization chart, custom data, and also, in this case, date-based data, rather than just events, anything involving a date. And we can connect to a variety of data sources. We can connect to data in SharePoint, either within the context of a single site or multiple different sites, aggregate data from multiple different SharePoint locations, and also connect to other data sources across Microsoft 365 using the Graph API. Now, I've only got a couple of slides just to set the scene, and we'll dive into the demos today because I like to show you the product. I like to show you how easy it is to work with these data tools, and in this case, the Calendar Plus app. So here's just a couple of examples of the sort of thing we can do. Things which are now quite hard to do in both the modern SharePoint experience and also inside of Microsoft Teams. There isn't a native calendar app within Teams, and actually presenting a calendar within modern SharePoint is incredibly difficult. The web parts on offer are very limited, and often you have to drop back into classic experience to get a calendar. In this case, these are modern SPFX web parts working on modern SharePoint sites and inside of Teams. So we can access that same data and present it in the context of our Teams channels as well, and I'll show you that during the course of the demo. So let's dive straight in. As Sarah says, feel free to ask questions as we go through the demo, and I'll pick them up as I go through. Now I'm going to start off today inside of SharePoint, and we can see here that I've got a regular SharePoint site, and in that site, we'll zoom out a little bit so we can see a little bit more of what's going on. I've got a calendar displayed, so I can see and view that calendar. And we've got some nice little features going on here. So we've got the ability to search, we've got the ability to filter, we've got the ability to switch between different types of presentation of that calendar. So week view, day view, back to month view. We've also got some color coding going on in terms of how that calendar is presented. Let's look at how we build that up in SharePoint with a couple of examples, and then we'll look at the experience in Teams as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to edit my page, and I'm actually going to show you this from scratch. I'm going to take my existing app here and remove it, and I'm just going to add the app again, and I'm going to go through a couple of scenarios of configuring different options around calendars. So first off, we're going to connect to a simple SharePoint list, and let's just save our page so we can go and have a look at that list first of all. So if I just open this up in a new tab, I've just got a SharePoint list within my site, and in that list I've got a number of fields of information, typical which you'd see when you're managing a list of events in this case. So these are to do with, in my scenario, some meetings around my project. So I've got a title, I've got some dates, so start and end date, and I've also got a category which I'm defining against my events. So fairly simple, fairly straightforward, and obviously I could build this up. This is just a regular SharePoint list with additional columns. If I return to my page, and from my available apps to add, I've got the option to add the Calendar Plus app. So I'm going to do that now. Obviously, I mentioned there were other apps to configure. If I click on the Calendar Plus, it will open up this right-hand pane where I can start to configure the app. So first of all, I select the data source. Now, we connect to a variety of different data sources, not only with the Calendar View Plus app, but the other data view apps as well. So I'm going to start off with just connecting to a SharePoint list. And one of the things which KWIZ have introduced is making it very easy to get up and running. So there's a sort of out-of-the-box basic mode which lets you do sort of core settings, and then we can switch to advanced mode if we need to do some more complex setting. So coping with different levels of expertise of users, but still very much targeted at end users, business users. You don't need to be a developer or a technical user to configure these apps. Next, I can define the SharePoint site I'm connecting to. In this case, my list exists in the same site, but I could connect to a different site to display this calendar. And I select my list. So in this case, I'm going to choose Project Calendar. And look, straight away it's configured it. I've not had to do anything. It's recognized some of the fields of information, but we can configure that a bit more if we want to. Notice I can restrict it based on a view. So if I only wanted to show events from a specific view, I could do that. And there is the option to customize this further with additional CSS. If I click Next here, I'm then taken to a screen where I can map my columns. Now the app has been fairly intelligent and worked out that my subject's my title. Yeah, that's right. I've got a category. Yeah, I'm going to map that to my category. And it's mapped start date and end date. So I don't need to do any more here. But if I had fields which I wanted to map to standard calendar fields, I could do that. Obviously, I can also have additional columns in my list which aren't related to any of these standard columns, and we can leverage those as well. So if we close that, and I'll just hit publish here, my calendar is immediately configured and ready to use. I can see how it's presented. It looks great, and I've got those options again to easily switch between views, and I've got a basic search control and also the opportunity to do a filter by specific dates, for example, so I could go and pick a specific date and filter the record. Now I want to build that up, and I want to show you how I can add some additional filter controls up here, customize the layout here, and also do some conditional formatting. So let's go into Edit. Now, first of all, within this mode, I can do some basic settings. So I can go in and configure the control. I can go and define what's my starting view by default. So I could say, for instance, I want to start with the week view, and that will be my default experience. I actually prefer the months view in this case. And I can also customize what options I'll have available to me. So maybe I want the week event agenda view. So I could add that as an available option. And then that gives me that option to see it in a different format. So very easily able to just do some simple customization around this calendar. Now, if I want to take it a little bit further, you see where I can switch to advanced mode here. And immediately, I've got the options of these little pluses here. So I can go and add additional functionality. Each of these controls in advanced mode will have more settings. So I can define things like the number of events in the grid and settings around business days and things like that, as well as what happens when we click on an individual item, so whether it opens it or performs a custom behavior of our choice. What I want to do, though, is build up the settings around this. So I can do that, first of all, by further configuring my filter, either through the settings of the configuration or by going and adding an additional filter category here. So in this case, I want to filter by event category. Next, I want to add additional controls. So there's a range of controls we can use, and in this case, I want to use the conditional formatting. And let's say I've got some categories here, so I want to color code events by different categories in my calendar. And I can do that really simply by just adding a conditional format. I can define what happens. So we'll use background color because that's the most visible on the screen. And let's pick a red. And then I can then add a condition. So I can say anywhere event category, and because it's a choice field, I get the options. Let's say where it's a meeting, I want to display that in red. And if we just publish these changes, we can see what I've done and how it's taken effect. So these ones here, which are classified as meetings in my category, I can then format and easily present this. And I could build this out across my other field types here. Also, I've added that additional filter. So in here, I can type a search, or what I like to do, especially if I've got predefined choices, is I can actually just go here immediately and select one. So I could say, well, I'm only interested in seeing engagements, or actually go in and select multiple, or even all except. So I want to exclude certain ones. So I can build up certain filters. You can even pre-save those filters, so you have a filtered calendar experience saying just show me meetings of a certain type. So very quickly we can build up and configure a calendar experience. So that's fairly nice, fairly straightforward. Let's take it and make it a little bit more complicated. So let's look at some other types of data. It's not just about having events. We can take other date-driven data, maybe tasks, milestones, and aggregate that further. So I've got a couple of task lists here. And the Calendar View Plus app, as well as other apps within the Data View toolset from QuizCom, can aggregate data from multiple lists. So we'll take the example of some tasks here, and I've got title, due date, assigned to, and status. So only a couple of these are calendar type fields, but we can still leverage the other fields in our experience. So let's return to my page. And for simplicity, I'm just going to delete this again and configure it from scratch, just to show you how simple it is to do. So again, let's find our Calendar Plus app. I'll select it, and this time I'm going to use the List Aggregator data source. Now firstly, I need to tell it what type of data I'm going to be using, so I use a SharePoint list as a guide. Doesn't matter which one of my aggregated lists, but I'm going to just pick one of my task lists, in this case business tasks. So this is just controlling what data we're going to display. Next, I need to define the sources of data. So I define a scope, and we can build up multiple scopes, so you could connect to data in different site collections or subsites and consolidate that information together. Now I can base it on a number of different patterns. So I could, for instance, use the list title, the site title, even looking at different list types as well, or content types. In this case, for simplicity, I know both of my lists are called tasks, so I'll include any which have got task in the title. And I'm going to enable that data source. Next, I need to go and do a little bit more mapping. Now, in this case, my column mapping's less. Now, I only actually need a start date, so I don't really have an end date for my task. So I'll just use due date as my date in this case. And I could go and define a category, so maybe I want to use my status field as my category. In this case, I'm not going to worry about that. Now let's configure this a bit further. Now I've got quite a lot of tasks, so let's make my starting view the week-based view. It's a bit cramped, isn't it? So maybe the week list view. That's quite nice. That gives me a useful way of viewing them, and I can see those different tasks listed across the week. Fairly straightforward, easy to present. And I maybe want to, well, I don't want the day view in this case, so I'll remove that. And I'll also have the week agenda view as an option to select from. So really quickly been able to have a few different ways in which I can look at my calendar. What else can we do? Let's make sure I add the week list view in as one of my options. I'm not going to have that week view. So we can build up our filters. So I can come in here and I can say, well, actually, I would like to have the status. It's not a calendar column, but I can still have it in my filter control. I also would like my person it's assigned to available. And so now I can start to do additional filters. So I could, for instance, say, well, I want to assign and show any which are assigned to Andrew. And it's filtered that list. And because I'm in the editing experience here, I can actually save that as the default filter, either for just me or for everyone, as I'm one of the admins here. So let me save that for everyone. And if I republish that now, you see that it's got a default filter. So it's defaulting to Andrew. I can, of course, come in and change that, remove the filter, or maybe build that up with further filters. So I only want to see ones which are in progress. Now with those filters, you can either make them visible, like I've got here, or you can have defined filters which aren't visible. So it's just pre-filtered, but people can't make any changes to that. So lots of options to configure that experience, and I could build this up with additional conditional formatting. But now I want to move on and show you another data source. So let's just remove my calendar. And the last data source I'm going to connect to is the Graph API. So anyone who's familiar with the Graph API will know that it runs across the whole of the Microsoft 365 toolset, Exchange, SharePoint, Teams, and other apps as well. And you can query a variety of data sources. QuizCom leverage it in a number of ways with pre-built samples. So for instance, with the organizational chart, we can connect to Active Directory information. And in this case, it's a great use in the Calendar Plus app to connect to data in Exchange. So this could be a shared calendar, or today I'm going to use one of the samples, which is my own calendar. So if I select that, so if you need to connect to a slightly more complicated graph path, you may need someone who's got a little bit more knowledge around the graph, or you can engage QuizCom to help you define the right query here. Again, I have the opportunity to map. As this is connecting to a standard Exchange calendar, all these columns will be pre-mapped for me. And you can see my calendars. This is connecting to my own calendar within Outlook, and it's displaying those different events directly into my page. So again, fulfilling a useful case where we still want to manage and access that calendar in Exchange, in Outlook, but we want to show it in one of our SharePoint team sites. It's very easy to do with the Calendar Plus app. And everything else can still be done. We can add additional filters here. Or if I switch to advanced mode, I can add my conditional formatting. So I've got a few vacations in my calendar. Now I've not categorized my calendar and used categories, but I could use, if I'd done that, I could base my conditional formatting or filtering on that. In this case, I'll do a really simple one. And I'll pick a color, let's pick a nice blue. And then I'm going to add a condition to it. So I'm going to say where the subject contains vacation. That perhaps wasn't a very good choice. Blue's not a very clear color, is it? Let's pick a different color here, and so we can see that a little bit better. So let's say I want to do it in red. Let's pick a nice red. And now if we save that again. There you go. Probably not very clear again, but we can see that we can do that customization of that appearance. So again, lots of controls around how we can present this. This is all stuff I've been setting up within minutes, so it's not complicated to do. This isn't something which, sure, my background's a little bit technical, but I haven't had to use any technical skills here. I haven't had to do any coding. It's very simple for me to configure. Now that's SharePoint, but also all of this works within Teams as well. So let's switch over to Teams. And there isn't really a good calendar experience within Teams. And I know it frustrates a number of my customers in terms of wanting to be able to present information from Exchange, information from their SharePoint lists, or other data sources and present calendars. So let's just go to this team I've got, and I've got a channel called Webinar. And in there, I've added a tab and the app to display that calendar which we saw at the beginning of the demo. I've got my conditional formatting available. I've got my filters, so I can filter the calendar easily. And I've got the opportunity to switch between these different views. Now, how easy is that to configure? It's really easy. So let's add a new tab. I'm going to select the DataView Plus app. So I'm using the DataView Plus app here within Teams, and then I can configure which experience I'm looking for. I don't want to post to the channel about it. And once I've added this app, it then will ask me, well, which of the different app experiences do I want to configure? So let's select Calendar Plus. Again, selecting my data source. Let's connect to that SharePoint list which we used in the first example. And you'll see the experience is exactly the same. Within seconds, I can connect to that project calendar. It's mapped my columns. It's there, it's ready to use. What did that take me? About 10-15 seconds to present a calendar from a SharePoint list within Teams. And this is a sort of issue which people get very frustrated about. Let's just tidy that up a bit. So let's go and give my app a name. And then if I want to modify that, I just come here to settings. Again, it's going to show me initially in the simple mode, so I can configure certain settings in each of these controls. But I've got the option to switch to advanced mode and do some more customization. Maybe I want to add more complex filters. Maybe I want to add that conditional formatting again. So I'm interested again, let's do a different one this time. Let's pick a nice green. And bear in mind, I could build up multiple conditions here as well. And I'm interested in this case where my event category is equal to, let's say, engagement. And again, really simply, really easily customize my calendar experience in Teams, managing my filters, managing my different presentation around things like conditional formatting, and the different experiences for viewing that data as well. Now, the other thing to bear in mind is within the wider DataView Plus and data visualization toolset from QuizCom, we're not just restricted to presenting that information in the calendar. So things like the List View Plus app allows us to present that information in a list format with tabs and groups and other things like that, as well as the filters and the conditional formatting. So we can go beyond, just presenting this information in a calendar format, but I think within a thing which is date-driven, whether it's a SharePoint list, multiple SharePoint lists, things like tasks, milestones, or data across the graph, especially in Exchange, we really want to use and present our data in a calendar form, and it's actually something which has been lacking in the Microsoft offering in the modern experience across both SharePoint and Teams for quite a while. So that's the end of my demo. I just want to sort of summarize with one quick slide just to finish off, and then we'll move into questions, and I'm sure you've asked a few different questions during the course of this webinar. So key points for me. Firstly, the Calendar Plus app is really easy to set up in either SharePoint or in Teams. You can configure a new calendar in less than a minute. You can easily connect it to those different data sources, whether that's a single SharePoint list, multiple SharePoint lists, in different sites as well. You can leverage the power of the graph to connect to a variety of different data sources. Perhaps the most useful is Exchange, but you could connect to other graph-based data sources. Now, all of the QuizCom data visualization apps use this sort of Lego style UI where you can build it up as we saw. So adding those different controls, adding those filter controls, adding those conditional formatting, and other controls which are maybe more specific to other apps. And it's very much designed for non-technical end users, business users to configure. Someone who just manages a single site, someone within their own team, they're an owner of a team and they just want to configure a calendar as part of their team. It's designed for those sort of users in the same way experiences around, using Teams are supposed to be targeted at those users. So it makes it very easy to leverage this information and present it in a very rich form. And that's it for me in terms of the core presentation. So just to say thank you. And now I'll pass back to Sarah and she'll hopefully have a few questions for me to answer.